Hello and welcome to my school channel. My name is Angela, and in this video we're going to continue the government topic by topic video lesson. So we're moving on to a new topic, local government administration in Nigeria, where we're going to discuss the features, the structure and functions of local governments. So please stay with us, don't go anywhere, we'll be right back. Welcome back to my school channel. Like I said earlier, we're moving on to local government administration in Nigeria. So let's dive right into it. So here are a list of the topics that we're going to discuss in this video lesson. We're going to begin with a definition of local government. We're going to discuss the evolution of local government administration in Nigeria. We're also going to discuss the role of traditional rulers, the local government reform that took place in 1976, the structure of Nigeria's local government, the sources of funds, the functions, problems, and measures to further improve local government administration in Nigeria. So let's begin with the definition of local government. Local government is the third tier of government established through an act of parliament and created at the grassroots level to address the specific needs of the community in a defined geographical area. So in your definition, it's important to note that it is the third tier of government. So we have the federal, the state, and the local governments. So it was established through an act of parliament. Remember, it is through the legislature that the local government is brought into being. So it is established through an act of parliament that has been made by the legislative house. So it is created also at the grassroots level so that citizens can be able to address their needs at the grassroots level. They will be able to have a government very close to them. It's also meant to address specific needs of the community. So there are unique needs for different local government areas within the country. And it is meant for a defined geographical area. So all of these things are important in your definition. Let's move on to the next slide. All right, so local governments act as intermediaries between the citizen and the states. So in order for the citizens to be able to relate their needs to the government, they have to be someone right there at the grassroots level so that they can actually address all of the issues that are going on within that particular community. So they manage various services such as waste management, public health, education, and infrastructure. So there are some things that are in the residual list that belong to the local government, that are in the jurisdiction of the local governments. So things such as waste management, public health, they help to sensitize people on health issues, things that are going on health-wise. They are also responsible for primary education especially, and also some infrastructure within the local governments. So these are some of the responsibilities of the local government in a particular community. So by promoting civic engagement and involving residents in decision-making, local government foster community ownership and accountability. So when the government is closer to the people and they get people to become active in the community, they are helping to improve ownership and accountability within that community. Let's move on to the next slide. All right, now we're going to discuss the evolution of local government administration in Nigeria. We're going to begin with the colonial era. So the British introduced the system of indirect rule, where traditional rulers administered local areas under colonial supervision. So remember that the British began colonial administration in the late 1900s. So at that time, they introduced that indirect rule system, whereby the traditional rulers in each of those various regions received policy direction from the Governor General of Nigeria. So the various local areas were therefore administered by these traditional rulers. Local government councils were created, but real power rested with colonial authorities. Remember, they had to receive policy direction from the Governor General. They are not allowed to make laws or enforce laws within the society. They have to follow the policies that were handed down to them from the central authorities. So there were several problems with this administration. First of all, there was a lack of uniformity. So each of these various regions had a different system of governance. In the northern region, you had the emir, who was a centralized leader. In the Igbo traditional society, there were warrant chiefs who were not legitimately appointed by the citizens. And then in the western region, you had the Alafin and various obas within various regions in the west. So there was that lack of uniformity. There was no uniform structure among the various local administrative systems. Then there was also excessive power given to some traditional rulers. So some of these traditional rulers had a lot of power and they were able to use that for their own benefits. So the excessive power that were given to these traditional rulers prevented the people from being able to stand up for themselves in some situations. Then there was the exclusion of educated elites from governance. So these educated elites, they had knowledge of how democratic system works and how they can help to protect the rights of the citizens. But these educated elites were not given the opportunity to rule. So this is another problem associated with the local government administration during the colonial era. Let's move on to the next slide. Still within the colonial era, the evolution of the Nigerian local government system can also be traced to the Great Britain municipal form of local governments, which was introduced in Lagos, Port Harcourt, and Enugu. So later on, the indirect rule system was scrapped, and so they introduced local government system that was likened to the municipal system that was in Britain at that time. So these municipalities had responsibilities similar to those in Britain, such as sanitation, local taxation, and maintenance of public facilities. So there were officials appointed within these municipalities. These were the structure we had at the local government level. And so they were responsible for all of these functions within those communities. The indirect rule system of native authorities, especially in the north, was gradually replaced with local government councils. So again, you can see it was not uniform across all the various regions within the country. The northern region, it was a little bit slower because in that society, the emir was seen as a divine ruler, so it was difficult for them to transition into this new system of local government administration. The lawmaking became relatively easier, though many native authorities were still too large to be effective. Let's move on to the next slide. All right, so in the north, the native authority system continued to respect and guarantee the emirship system. Again, they felt the emirs were divine rulers, and so they respected the emirship system at that time. So it was very difficult to transition into that new system of administration in the north. So in that sense, they had a two-tier system whereby you have the colonial authorities at the top and the emirs who were receiving policy direction from the colonial authorities. Then in the south, however, the structure was more diverse and fragmented, so they had different systems within various regions in the south. In the eastern region, there was the two-tier system. That means you had the colonial authorities and then the warrant chiefs and district officers that were receiving policy direction from the colonial authorities. Then in the midwestern and western region, there was a three-tier system in the sense that you had the colonial authorities, the traditional rulers, and some district officials. So these traditional rulers and district officers, they were both receiving policy direction from the colonial authority, but they were responsible for different areas of administration within these regions. Then in Lagos, there was just a one-tier system. It was the colonial administrative authority that were administering the affairs of the residents in Lagos. So there was no traditional ruler. Everything was directly from the colonial authorities. Then structures included divisional councils, district councils, local councils, and city councils with powers defined by the laws that created them. So we have city councils in places like Lagos and Port Harcourt. Then we had divisional council and district councils in other regions within the country. So we can see that it was not uniform at that time. The local government administration was not uniform during the colonial era. Let's move on to the next slide. All right, for instance, the law or instrument that established the local council always set out a list of functions the body could perform, while the Minister of Local Government was empowered to allocate specific powers and responsibilities to the different levels of local governments. So this means that laws were put in place so that the colonial authorities could inform the local authorities on the list of functions that they have to perform within their region. And when such functions are not listed for them, the Minister of Local Government can also allocate specific functions depending on the emerging needs within the society. So these people did not have autonomy at that time. They were still receiving policy direction from the colonial authorities. Then in the post-independence era, that is between 1960 to 1975, local government was weak. The states controlled their structure, and this led to variation and inefficiency across the federation. So after independence, remember, Nigeria became a federation in 1954. So when Nigeria gained independence, we had the federal and state governments. The local government was still not uniform at that time. Most of the functions that the local government is performing now were performed mostly by the state governments. And so the local government at that time was very weak. They were still receiving policy direction from the federal and state governments, and they were not allowed to make decisions on their own. So this led to political instability, it led to corruption and the lack of resources, which further weakened their effectiveness. So they were not given enough resources to perform certain functions within the community. Let's move on to the next slide. All right, so the local government reform that took place in 1976 turned things around. So the reform marked a turning point by introducing a uniform nationwide local government system with defined structures, responsibilities, and funding mechanisms. So it was a reform that took place during the regime of Olusegun Obasanjo, who was military head of state at that time. So he decided to ensure that all of the various local governments was uniform across the various regions within the country. So it recognized local government as the third tier of government in Nigeria. And so subsequent constitutions, that is the 1979, the 1989, and the 1999 constitution, consolidated the role of local governments. However, there were still challenges such as financial dependence. This means that they were still dependent on the federal and state government for resources to perform their responsibilities. There was also state interference. The states had the power to scrap the local government at any time. And so this is another challenge that the local government was facing. There was also corruption and poor service delivery. So these were all of the challenges of the local government, even after the reform that took place in 1976. Let's move on to the next slide. All right, now we're going to discuss the role of traditional rulers in local government administration during the pre-reform era. So the system of indirect rule introduced by the British colonial administration in Nigeria relied heavily on traditional rulers to govern at the local level. So under this system, local administration was carried out through established traditional institutions, particularly in areas where centralized authority already existed. So this means that through indirect rule, they were using the traditional institutions that already existed before they came to ensure that policies were being implemented in the various regions. So the system worked especially well in northern Nigeria, where the emirate system was centralized and hierarchical. So once they give policy direction to the emir was able to relay those policy direction to those people below him. So there was a hierarchical system that made it very easy for policy direction to go right to the bottom, to the grassroots of the society in the northern region. So in fact, during the colonial period, the House of Chiefs was established as a second chamber in the northern region. This was because the people respected the emirate system so much, and so they needed to create a second house for the State House of Assembly, known as the House of Chiefs, whereby chiefs from this emirate system were allowed to make decisions, make laws on behalf of the people within the society. So similar arrangements was later extended to other regions. When other regions felt like they needed their traditional rulers to also be present in policy making within those various regions, they established the House of Chiefs, especially in the Western region. So the Western region too also had a two-tier system at the regional level. They had the House of Chiefs and House of Assembly. It was only in the Eastern region that there was no House of Chiefs. This was because during the pre-colonial era, the Igbo society was decentralized, and so there was no need for a separate house for the House of Assembly. So they had just one House of Assembly where the elected chiefs made laws on behalf of the people. So this was the role of traditional rulers at this time. They were able to make laws in the House of Chiefs, one of the two chambers of House of Assembly, and they were also allowed to implement policies. These policies they implemented were gotten directly from the colonial authorities. Now let's move on to the next slide. Right, during the First Republic, which took place between 1960 and 1963, House of Chiefs were present in all the three regions, that is the northern, western, and eastern regions, where membership was largely drawn from first-class and second-class traditional rulers. So after independence, they decided to create the House of Chiefs also in the eastern region, so that there will be two houses at the various regional assemblies within the country. So the first chamber was the House of Assembly, made up of elected officials, people who were elected by the citizens. While the House of Chiefs served as the second chamber, most of the members of the House of Chiefs were not elected, but they were appointed using a traditional system. So the following were the roles of traditional rulers in the pre-reform local governments. First of all, they became ministerial appointees. So some traditional rulers were appointed to ministerial and administrative positions within the regional governments. This gave them direct influence over policy and governance. You can see that the traditional rulers at this time were allowed to make and enforce laws within the society. They were appointed as ministers in the sense that they were able to make policies and implement policies within their various departments. Then they were also given power to make laws within the society. But first of all, these ministerial appointments allowed them to make and implement policies within their communities. Let's move on to the next slide. Then they were, in certain cases, traditional rulers were also appointed as regional governors. They acted as representatives of the colonial or post-colonial state authority. For example, late Sir Adesoji Aderemi, who was the Ooni of Ife, was made regional governor of the Western region in 1960. So at that time, the governor was a ceremonial position. We had the premier, who was the head of government at that time. He was a member of the House of Assembly and was responsible for making and implementing laws. But the governor had ceremonial functions. So as head of state, he was allowed to perform ceremonial functions within the states. So the Ooni of Ife became the regional governor. So we can see also that the traditional rulers were allowed to take political positions at that time. Then they were also responsible for legislation. Through the House of Chiefs, traditional rulers participated in the legislative process, especially by reviewing bills passed by the House of Assembly. They acted as a check on the tyranny of the popularly elected first chamber. So the House of Chiefs were mostly populated by traditional rulers, and what they were responsible for was to review bills that have already been passed by the House of Assembly, the elected officials in the House of Assembly. So they reviewed it to ensure that it followed the customs, the traditions of the people within that region. So in that sense, they were acting as a check on the activities of these elected members of the first chamber. Then they were also presidents of customary courts. Traditional rulers presided over customary courts and ensured that justice was administered in line with local customs and traditions. So customary courts were the courts at the local level. They were allowed to adjudicate cases based on the custom and traditions of the land. And so they became presidents of these courts. And sometimes the decisions made by these courts are binding on the people within that region. And that role of traditional rulers in the pre-reform era is the decentralization of power. They acted as intermediaries between the colonial/post-colonial governments and the local population. And this helped the government gain legitimacy in the eyes of the people and made it easier to mobilize resources and enforce policies. Remember when the British colonial administration came, they decided to enforce this indirect rule system because they knew it would be very difficult to get down into the grassroots to implement certain policies. And so they had to do it through traditional rulers that were already legitimate in the eyes of the people at that time. So this is the reason they decentralized power to these traditional rulers, to ensure that they can get into the grassroots of the community. Let's move on to the next slide. Now we are going to discuss the 1976 local government reform in detail. So the reform was initiated by the federal military government under General Olusegun Obasanjo, who was then head of state, following the 1975 military coup that brought General Murtala Muhammad to power. So the government set up a guidelines committee on local government reforms in 1976. The aim was to streamline and standardize local government administration across the country. So they saw that the local government administration that was there at that time was not functioning properly. And so they decided to ensure that this new local government administration was uniform across the various regions within the country. So it was a joint initiative between the federal governments and the state governments. They all came together to discuss ways in which the local governments can perform their duties properly within the various states of the federation. What was the process of this reform? First of all, it began with consultation and committee work. So a reform committee worked closely with both the federal and state governments to produce the 1976 guidelines, and recommendations were made on structure, funding, and functions of the local governments. So a committee was set up to ensure that they get as much information as possible to make sure that the local government that was set up was actually responding to the emerging needs of the people within the community. Let's move on to the next slide. All right, the next stage in this reform is the adoption of a uniform structure nationwide. So local governments were given a single-tier structure across the country. Each local government was headed by a chairman, a local government chairman, and assisted by elected councillors representing wards. So the local government chairman is a member of the executive. These councillors are members of the legislature, and they were representing the various wards within the local governments and making laws on behalf of the members of the community within those wards. Then there was also constitutional recognition. For the first time, local government was formally recognized as the third tier of government alongside the federal and state governments. So this happened in 1979 when the 1979 constitution was introduced in the wake of the Second Republic. Then there was democratic participation. The reform emphasized the election of local government officials. The local government chairman, the councillors, they were all elected by people within the local governments. Then there was also defined functions. Clear functions were assigned to local governments such as primary health care, primary education, sanitation, local roads, markets, and motor parks. There are defined responsibilities for the local governments in each of these various states of the Federation. Let's move on to the next slide. So there was also funding arrangements made. Local governments were guaranteed a share of the Federation accounts. States were also mandated to contribute to their local government's finances. We are going to discuss a lot about sources of fund for the local governments, but the major source of fund for the local government is from the Federation accounts. The Federation allocates a particular amount of resources to the various local governments within the country. Then there's also professionalization. The local government administration was to be managed by trained staff in the United Local Government Service to ensure better efficiency. They ensured that the people that were working in the local government were professionals, people who have been trained in civil service, and they belong to a civil service commission. So this helped to ensure that there was efficiency within the local governments. So we've come to the end of this segment of the video lesson. I believe it was educative and insightful. If you would like to continue on this journey with us, please go down to the link in the description below. This takes you to my school website where you can subscribe for the government topic by topic video lesson. There you can continue on this journey with us. So we're going to move on to the structure of the local government, where we'll discuss the legislative and the executive arms of the local government and how they check on one another. And then we're also going to discuss the functions of the local government. I hope to see you there. I believe you're enjoying this content. If yes, please do not forget to hit the like button, click on the subscribe button, and lastly tap on the notification bell to get informed as soon as we release next videos.